So imagine you're locking yourself in a tiny bathroom.
Right.
You literally string up fairy lights across the mirror.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and you bring in a little speaker to play soft music. You're sitting perfectly still on the tile floor, just, holding your breath. You're pretending you simply do not exist.
And you're not doing this for fun.
No, exactly. You aren't doing this for a game of hide and seek. You're doing it because the person pacing furiously on the other side of that door, who is seeing red and destroying the house, is actively studying cult manuals.
Right. Literally figuring out how to dismantle your reality.
Exactly. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at something that is incredibly difficult to map out, because usually when we look at trauma or like a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, right? It's like engineering. You break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, the doctor points to it, and there it is.
It's binary. I mean, the bone is broken or it isn't, the tumor is there or it's not. We take immense comfort in the visible, right? Because it gives us a clear path to fixing it.
But when you step into the world of psychological abuse and coercive control, that x-ray machine is completely useless.
Totally useless.
You're looking at a diagnostic landscape where the damage isn't a cracked bone. It's a cracked sense of self. And that is incredibly difficult to point to on a chart, which is exactly what our mission is today. The source material for this deep dive is a transcript of an intensely raw clinical interview between journalist Andrew Gold and actress Evan Rachel Wood.
And we are looking directly at her account of her relationship with her former partner, the musician Marilyn Manson.
Right, and I want to set the tone immediately.
Yeah, we really should clarify this up front. The mission here is not to dissect tabloid fodder or, recount celebrity gossip.
None at all.
The source material functions as a step-by-step deconstruction of coercive control. It exposes systemic exploitation within the Hollywood machine. And I think most importantly, it lays bare the deeply calculated psychology of a high-profile abuser.
So, if you are listening right now, whether you are trying to understand the red flags of manipulation in your own inner circles, or you're just fascinated by the dark underbelly of the entertainment industry, this deep dive is going to hand you the narcissist's playbook.
A literal playbook.
Yeah. We want you to know exactly what these tactics look like, how they function mechanically, and why they are so devastatingly effective.
And if we truly want to understand that playbook, we have to start by completely reframing how society thinks about extreme abuse. Because, there's a pervasive myth that monsters announce themselves.
Right, that they come in roaring.
Exactly. But extreme abuse rarely, if ever, starts with violence. It starts with a mask. It starts with a carefully constructed illusion tailored specifically to the target's deepest vulnerabilities.
Which is exactly what we see here. By analyzing Wood's specific experiences, which, by the way, she articulates with incredible clinical precision in this interview, we're looking at the universal tactics used by cult leaders, high-control groups, and domestic abusers to just systematically erase a person's boundaries.
So let's look at the very beginning of this timeline.
Yeah, let's unpack this. Because the initial context is a giant waving red flag all on its own. Evan Rachel Wood was just 18 years old when they met.
18. And he was 37.
37, nearly 2 decades older than her, and married at the time to Dita Von Teese. So the question that inevitably surfaces in the public discourse, and it's a question rooted in a complete misunderstanding of grooming, is how does a smart, successful, grounded teenager get pulled into this dynamic?
Right. People always ask that.
And Wood describes her initial perception of him, and it completely subverts what you might expect. She didn't see him as a terrifying monster. She says she thought he was Edward Scissorhands.
Oh, that is such a specific and revealing archetype.
Right.
The Edward Scissorhands archetype is arguably one of the most effective disguises a predator can wear. Think about what that character represents to people.
He looks frightening, but he's gentle.
Exactly. He looks frightening to the outside world. He literally has weapons for hands. He's surrounded by this dark aesthetic. But internally, the narrative is that he is gentle, deeply sensitive, and profoundly lonely.
The ultimate misunderstood outsider.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that perfectly aligned with her perception of his public persona. She saw him as this poetic artist, challenging religious and oppressive norms. She thought his shock rock image was just a high-minded intellectual vehicle.
Yeah, she assumed that underneath the leather and the heavy makeup, he was just a vulnerable genius who the world unfairly demonized.
And that perception is the exact opening an abuser is looking for. Predatory individuals are exceptionally skilled at reading people. He recognized immediately that she possessed a very high degree of empathy.
So instead of coming at her with power, he weaponized her empathy against her.
Exactly. The source material details how Manson utilized one of the darkest moments in modern American history, the Columbine High School massacre, to build a specific victimized narrative for himself.
The Columbine scapegoat narrative. For anyone listening who might not remember the cultural landscape of the late 90s, after the horrific school shooting at Columbine, the media heavily blamed Marilyn Manson's music.
It was a massive moral panic.
A huge panic. They suggested his music was the catalyst that inspired the shooters.
A panic that, by the way, completely ignored the facts, as later investigations proved the shooters weren't even fans of his music.
Right, but the narrative was already set in stone. His career suffered, he faced massive protests, bomb threats, death threats. It was a genuine cultural backlash.
And according to Wood in this interview, when he was wooing her, he leaned into that backlash incredibly hard. He played the ultimate victim.
He told her that this media circus had ruined his life, that he was merely a scapegoat for a broken society just because of the way he chose to express his art.
He claimed the trauma of it all made him want to abandon music entirely. He told her he just wanted to stay in his house and paint and be alone.
And then he delivers the hook. He looks at this empathetic 18-year-old and says, "You're really special. I don't have many friends, but I'm letting you in."
So manipulative.
It's like an autoimmune disease. A virus doesn't attack the body by looking like a threat. It presents itself as a normal cell, so your white blood cells ignore it.
That is a perfect analogy.
He presented himself as a wounded victim, so her psychological immune system would embrace him rather than attack him. It's like the ultimate Trojan horse. He doesn't come in roaring, he comes in limping. But wait, I have to ask, is this a common tactic? Playing the wounded bird to attract someone with high empathy? Because she was a hypervigilant child actor. How does she not see through it?
Empathy isn't a blind spot. It's a highly exploitable mechanism if the manipulator knows how to trigger the caregiving response. The interviewer, Andrew Gold, makes a brilliant comparison in the transcript to Ted Bundy.
Wait, Ted Bundy, like with the fake cast?
Exactly that. Bundy wearing the fake cast on his arm and dropping his books, asking young women to help him load things into his Volkswagen Beetle.
Oh, wow, yeah.
The psychological mechanism is identical. A predator knows that if they present as a physical or emotional threat, your amygdala fires up, your defenses engage, and you flee.
Right.
But if they present as wounded, if they present as the victim of an unfair world, your threat detection system powers down. Your caregiving instincts completely override your caution.
So for a young, highly empathetic person like Wood, the instinct isn't to run away.
No, the instinct is to heal him, to protect him from the cruel world. And by telling her, "You are the only one who understands me," he isn't just asking for help. He is manufacturing a trauma bond based on a false sense of exclusivity.
Wow.
He is isolating her emotionally from everyone else in her life right from the start, making her feel like they are a team of two against a world that is fundamentally hostile to their misunderstood genius.
Okay, so we've established how he bypassed her initial defenses by playing the wounded outsider, creating this intense us versus the world dynamic.
Right.
But once the empathetic target is hooked, the abuser eventually has to exert actual control. They begin isolating them from reality. And that psychological escalation is exactly what we see happening with the deployment of the mask.
The mask, yes. The concept of the mask is arguably the most terrifying element of interacting with someone who possesses dark triad traits, so narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Because it proves premeditation.
Exactly. It reveals the chilling reality of premeditation. It proves definitively that the abuse is not a loss of emotional control. It is a conscious, strategic choice.
And Wood gives this highly specific, terrifying example in the interview, going back to that bathroom sanctuary we talked about in the intro.
Right.
She describes how before Manson would have to do an on-camera interview or attend a public event, he would go into these absolute unhinged narcissistic rages in the house, berating everyone, destroying property, physically seeing red. The environment was guaranteed to be volatile.
The Wood, simply to survive these episodes, started locking herself in a bathroom.
Yeah, and she spent so much time hiding in this specific bathroom that she began to treat it as her only safe space. She strung up the lights, she played the music, she essentially built a sanctuary inside a cage.
It's a profound physical manifestation of her psychological state. She is shrinking her entire world down to a few square feet of tile just to avoid triggering a predator.
She actually compared it to the T-Rex in Jurassic Park. If you don't move, if you don't make a sound, the monster can't see you.
That's horrifying.
But here is the moment that completely shattered her reality the moment she saw behind the curtain.
Yeah.
She steps out of the bathroom right before he is scheduled to go on camera for an interview. He is still radiating darkness. His eyes are black. He is completely dysregulated.
Right.
And then the camera operator hits record, and she watches him, in a fraction of a second, just slip the mask on.
Just
Instantly transforms into the calm, well-spoken, highly intellectual, charming Marilyn Manson persona. She says watching that transition blew her mind, and it raises this profound question. If he can turn that face on and off so flawlessly, was any of our relationship real?
experiencing that moment, witnessing the mask slip on and off with such mechanical precision, induces massive cognitive dissonance.
I can imagine.
Because as the partner, you are suddenly faced with two completely incompatible realities that cannot exist at the same time. If he can turn off the blinding rage and turn on the articulate charm that flawlessly in a split second, then the rage was never an uncontrollable emotional response.
It's a tool.
Yes, it is a tool used to dominate the household, and the charm is a weapon used to manipulate the public.
What brings up a really interesting distinction here that I think trips a lot of people up. An interviewer asks her, essentially, well, you're an incredible award-winning actor. Couldn't you just do that? Just put on a face. And she makes this brilliant differentiation between the art of acting and the pathology of manipulating. She says acting is about finding emotional truth. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and making that emotional reality genuine in your body.
It requires empathy.
Exactly. But lying, manipulating with a false persona feels entirely different somatically. She says, I'm a great actor. I'm a terrible liar.
That distinction is vital. When a trained actor performs, they're utilizing empathy to connect with the human condition. When a person with psychopathic traits puts on a mask, they're devoid of empathy.
They're just mirroring.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They aren't searching for emotional truth. They're executing a calculated strategy to achieve the desired outcome. They are mirroring human emotion to bypass your defenses. And the source material provides terrifying, concrete evidence that this was an active area of study for him.
Right, the library.
Wood notes that in Manson's private library, he had a massive collection of books dedicated to cults, to mind control, to psychological manipulation, and he actively studied the teachings of Scientology.
The interviewer actually asks if Manson was a psychopathic narcissist, and Wood agrees entirely. This wasn't accidental bad behavior from a troubled rock star. This was academic.
Academic is the perfect word. When an abuser is literally studying cult tactics and mind control literature, it completely erases any lingering societal excuse that their behavior is just a symptom of a troubled childhood or substance abuse.
It's deliberate.
It is the calculated, premeditated application of psychological warfare. And the ultimate goal of that warfare is total coercive control.
So let's define coercive control, because we hear the term thrown around a lot in pop psychology, but the way it is functionally described in this interview is absolute everyday torture.
It really is.
It's not just physical violence, it's the micromanagement of a person's baseline reality. Wood describes severe sleep deprivation. He would throw heavy objects at her just to jolt her awake if she tried to sleep.
And keep her awake for days.
Right. He would keep her awake for 2 days straight, relentlessly berating her, especially if her family tried to intervene. For example, if her father sent an email expressing concern, that would trigger a 48-hour cycle of sleep deprivation and verbal abuse.
It's systemic.
So I want to understand the mechanics here. Why is sleep deprivation the go-to tool for this kind of control?
Because it biologically disables your brain's defense systems. Sleep deprivation is a classic documented interrogation technique and a fundamental cult mind control tactic.
Wow.
When you are kept awake for 48 hours, your amygdala, the brain's fear and emotional center, goes into absolute overdrive. You become hyper-reactive.
So you're just pure emotion and fear.
Exactly. And simultaneously, your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for logic, critical thinking, and boundary setting, literally begins to shut down. He wasn't just making her tired, he was chemically altering her brain.
That is terrifying.
You lose the biological ability to process reality accurately, making you entirely dependent on the abuser to tell you what is real and what isn't.
And he compounded that with food deprivation. She explains that he wouldn't allow her to eat unless he was eating. And because he was allegedly on massive multi-day drug binges where he had no appetite, she wouldn't be allowed to eat for days either.
Or he'd play power games with the food.
Yes. In a display of pure dominance, he would order food, make her plate it in a very specific, meticulous way, and then simply throw the plate against a wall as a power play.
It's all about breaking autonomy.
She also mentions he systematically monitored her communication, reading her emails, checking her messages, and even having his assistants follow her in public to take pictures, proving she was exactly where she claimed to be.
What you are describing is the systemic dismantling of a human being's autonomy at the most fundamental biological level.
It really is.
As Wood notes in the interview, this is the clinical definition of coercive control. How do you completely restrain somebody without ever using physical handcuffs?
Right.
You do it by controlling their access to finances, their ability to communicate with the outside world, and their basic biological needs for sleep and sustenance. You engineer an environment where the victim's entire cognitive bandwidth is focused solely on appeasing the abuser just to survive the next hour.
There's no room left to even think about leaving.
There is no room left for self-actualization, let alone planning an escape.
And this obsessive need for total ownership culminated in something genuinely horrifying: cult branding.
Yeah.
Wood explains that Manson was intensely pathologically jealous. To prove her devotion, to prove that she permanently belonged to him, he coerced her into scarification.
Gratification.
He carved an E on himself, and he coerced her to carve an M near her pelvic region. He explicitly stated this was to ward off others and serve as a permanent mark of ownership.
Now, I have to stop here. A two-person dynamic is horrific, but can we really call it a cult? Does that label actually
No,
apply?
it absolutely applies,
Yeah.
because the underlying mechanism is identical. The line between domestic abuse and a high-control cult is practically non-existent.
A cult is simply a domestic abuse dynamic scaled up to include more people. The interviewer and Wood explicitly draw a parallel here to the NXIVM cult.
Right, the organization led by Keith Raniere, where he formed a secret society of women.
Yes, das. In NXIVM, Raniere coerced women into providing damaging collateral to ensure their silence, and then coerced them into being physically branded with his initials as a sign of lifelong submission.
Oh my God. The parallels?
The DNA of that mass manipulation and the one-on-one dynamic between Manson and Wood is the exact same. In both cases, the goal of the branding or scarification is to create permanent, physical proof of subjugation.
It's a psychological point of no return.
Exactly. It is designed to make the victim internalize the belief that their body is quite literally no longer their own property. It belongs to the leader.
It's sickening. And what is so deeply unsettling to me is that this private, systemic dismantling of her boundaries behind closed doors didn't stay behind closed doors.
No, it rarely does.
Abusers eventually need to test their power in public. They need to know they can get away with it when others are watching. And that psychological escalation is exactly what we see happening on the set of a music video shoot.
This incident represents a massive, devastating escalation, not just in the nature of the abuse itself, but in exposing the complicity of the environment, enabling the abuser.
Let's lay out the facts of this music video shoot exactly as they are detailed in the transcript. Evan Rachel Wood was 19 years old at the time. Manson was the director of the video, and he was also starring in it alongside her.
So he holds all the professional power.
All of it.
Yeah.
And the very first thing he does on set is give her absinthe. Now, Wood notes that she wasn't a big drinker, and she points out that absinthe doesn't just make you sloppy drunk, it puts you in this weird hallucinogenic dream space.
Right.
She said she felt disconnected, like what was happening wasn't entirely real, but she wasn't passing out either.
Which highlights a very specific, calculated choice of substance. He didn't want her unconscious. He wanted her compliant, disoriented, and unable to mount a defense.
Then comes the ambush. Wood explains that there were no SAG guidelines in place.
The Screen Actors Guild.
Right. For those listening who might not know, the Screen Actors Guild has strict protocols for filming intimate scenes. You have to sign nudity clauses in advance, there are supposed to be closed-set agreements where only essential crew is present, and today we have intimacy coordinators.
None of that was there.
None of it. Wood explicitly states she was not informed and did not believe that any of her clothes were coming off that day. But the cameras roll, and as part of the scene, he just starts taking her clothes off.
Without warning.
And then he non-consensually penetrates her on camera.
The psychological paralysis she describes experiencing in that moment is critical for the public to understand.
Yeah.
She says she completely froze. She didn't know how to stop it. He had his hands around her neck. His face was pressed heavily into hers. She notes she couldn't have even found the voice to say no, even if she tried.
This brings up the freeze response, which I think is so often misunderstood by juries and the public.
It is fundamentally misunderstood. In trauma biology, we talk about the autonomic nervous system's response to a threat: fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
Often people think of freezing as a conscious choice to do nothing, like a sign of weakness. It is not.
It's biological.
Yes. When a person's brain rapidly calculates that fighting back is impossible or that fleeing will result in greater physical harm, the nervous system completely hijacks the body. The parasympathetic nervous system drops your heart rate and literally immobilizes your muscles to survive the attack, minimizing damage.
It is an evolutionary survival mechanism.
Exactly.
And this biological reality is exactly where the legal system fails victims so profoundly. Because she wasn't kicking, because she wasn't screaming for help, because she wasn't falling over drunk, it becomes incredibly difficult for prosecutors to prove non-consent to a jury.
Juries expect a victim to fight back like an action hero.
Right. The district attorney looks at the case and says, how do we prove to a jury that this was premeditated assault and not just a boundary crossing during a wild artistic performance?
But Wood drops a crucial piece of evidence in this interview that completely reframes the event.
Yes, proving premeditation. She says she spoke to another individual who was on set that day, a crew member who heard Manson explicitly ask wardrobe for underwear for Wood that could be easily removed so that he could penetrate her.
He planned it.
He planned the ambush before she even stepped on set.
That detail is chilling. It fundamentally changes the legal and moral landscape of the incident. It shifts it entirely from an impulsive, heat-of-the-moment action into a calculated, premeditated sexual assault masquerading as art.
But wait, I have to push back on the environment here because here's where it gets really interesting, but in a horrific way. There's an entire crew present.
Right.
The interviewer points out that this assault was recorded, it was finalized, and it was eventually put on YouTube for the world to see. There were camera operators framing the shot, there were lighting technicians, there were producers. Why didn't anyone stop it? Why didn't anyone yell, "Cut"?
Wood provides the vital context for this. She mentions that Manson had been screaming at and berating the entire crew before she even arrived on set. He had already established an atmosphere of total dominance, volatility, and fear.
So everyone is already walking on eggshells.
Exactly. This is a devastating real-world example of the bystander effect layered on top of extreme power dynamics. In an environment where one individual holds all the financial, professional, and social power, he is the famous star, he's the director, he is signing the paychecks, the people underneath him become terrified to intervene.
They're paralyzed, too, in a way.
Wood points out that this was pre-Me Too. The industry culture was different. You don't want to cause waves. You don't want to be labeled a difficult crew member.
Right.
You don't want to go against the abusive rock star director who could blacklist you. So when the assault began, the crew's moral disgust was high enough to make them literally walk off the set. They couldn't stomach watching it. But their fear of him was high enough to prevent them from actually intervening to help the victim.
They walked out. They left a 19-year-old girl sitting on a bed, crying and violated. We're leaving, but you're on your own. That is essentially what that collective action communicates to a victim.
And the psychological impact of that abandonment on Wood cannot be overstated.
It must be shattering.
When a public violation of that magnitude happens, and a room full of working adult professionals witnesses it and actively chooses to do nothing to protect you, it shatters whatever remaining sense of self-worth you have.
Wow.
It completely validates the abuser's internal narrative, that you have no inherent value, that no one is coming to save you, and that this abusive, degrading reality is all you deserve.
It creates a complete vacuum of hope, which leads us directly into the cycle of returning and ultimately the most violent, terrifying encounter described in the source material.
Right.
The interviewer, Andrew Gold, asks the question that everyone who hasn't experienced abuse always asks. Why didn't she just leave?
A very common question.
And Wood answers by bringing up a staggering statistic. She says it takes an average of 7 attempts for a domestic violence victim to leave their abuser, 7 distinct attempts to break free.
And we must emphasize that 7 is just the statistical average.
Yeah.
For many victims, it takes 10, 15, or 20 attempts. The mechanisms that pull a victim back into the gravity of the abuser are incredibly powerful.
Like the trauma bonding we talked about.
Yes, you are dealing with trauma bonding, which operates on the brain much like a chemical addiction cycles of extreme cortisol spikes during abuse, followed by dopamine hits during the apology phase. You have financial control, profound fear of physical retaliation, and the abuser's constant manipulative promises of change.
Wood explains that after the abuse escalated to this degree, she didn't know how to function in the normal world anymore. She felt entirely broken. She felt that this horrific dynamic was as good as her life was ever going to get.
And Manson would use extreme emotional manipulation to pull her back in whenever she tried to pull away. Specifically, he would threaten self-harm.
He was threatening to kill himself, and she went over to his house because she was genuinely terrified he was going to die and it would be her fault. And that is when she walked into the torture room.
The scene she describes upon returning to the house to save him is the absolute pinnacle of coercive control and psychological terror.
It is genuinely hard to even listen to the audio of her recounting this. She arrives under the guise of an emergency, trying to save his life. Instead, he has a room fully prepared.
Premeditated again.
Yes. He has a wooden prayer kneeler set up. He has a device she calls a violent wand, which is an instrument that sends high-voltage electrical currents to shock the skin. He has ropes. And most disturbingly, he has a literal historical relic from the Holocaust, a leather whip emblazoned with a swastika. Now, Wood is Jewish. This is not just random violence.
No, it is highly specific. The inclusion of the Nazi whip elevates this from physical abuse to identity-based psychological annihilation.
Annihilation, that's exactly it.
It is designed to degrade her at the absolute deepest, most cellular level of her heritage and her humanity. It is meant to communicate utter contempt for her existence.
So he frames this entire premeditated, horrifying scenario as a test of her loyalty. He tells her, "I'll let you leave, but I have to know I can trust you. And the only way I'll know I can trust you is if you prove you're willing to die for me."
Disgusting.
He says, "I'm going to tie you up, and you won't know if I'm going to kill you or not. But if you do this, if you submit to this, I'll let you go."
And Andrew Gold asks the heavy, impossible question. Why didn't she just leave right then, the moment he brought out the ropes? Why did she agree to be tied up?
Right.
To understand her choice in that moment, we have to understand the psychology of the hostage mindset. Look at historical cases of hostages or prisoners of war. Wood tells the interviewer, "I felt like I was bartering for my freedom."
She wanted the relentless emotional abuse to stop.
Exactly. The constant paranoid calling, the terrifying threats against her family and friends. She just wanted him to let her go.
To Wood, submitting to this extreme physical violence felt like the very last piece of currency she had left to buy her permanent freedom and secure her family's safety.
She literally says in the interview, "I didn't think there was an alternative."
And that, right there, is the ultimate terrifying goal of coercive control.
Yes. The abuser systematically eliminates every other conceivable option in the victim's mind, closing every door until the victim believes the abuser is the sole arbiter of their survival.
So she didn't submit because she wanted to.
No. She submitted because she genuinely, rationally believed within her distorted reality that it was the only way to survive the night and protect the people she loved.
So he ties her up naked, hands in front, feet secured behind her. He forces her to watch violent graphic images on a screen, specifically a girl slitting her wrists, while physically holding her head in place and whispering into her ear, "This is what love does to people."
It's just utter psychological torture.
He whips her with the swastika whip, and then, because he wanted to inflict maximum agony, he uses the electrical wand to shock the fresh, bleeding welts. She says she left her body. She completely dissociated. She thought she was going to die right there in that room. But then biology took over.
Her survival instinct.
Right. The physical pain of being electrocuted on those whip marks was so intensely overwhelming that her body jerked reflexively, so hard and with such force that she actually broke the solid wooden prayer kneeler in half. And that physical break is how she got free.
What you are describing is the human body's autonomic somatics survival instinct overriding the brain's psychological freeze response.
It's incredible.
Her mind had completely surrendered to the hostage situation, but her nervous system recognized an imminent threat to life and deployed an explosive burst of adrenaline to literally break the physical restraints. It is a profound testament to the sheer biological will to live, even in the darkest possible moment.
Okay, let's just take a breath. That is incredibly heavy. So what does this all mean for how we view victims? Because we have to pull back and ask a much broader sociological question here.
Yeah, we have to look at the environment.
How did an intelligent, successful, driven person like Evan Rachel Wood get to a place where she had been so deeply preconditioned to accept such terrifying boundary violations as a normal part of love? And the answer, according to the source material, lies heavily in the systemic machinery of Hollywood.
Yes. We cannot look at Manson in a vacuum. If we want to understand the vulnerability, we have to look at the environment that shaped Wood's foundational understanding of boundaries before she even met him.
Which means looking at her childhood.
Exactly. The interviewer smartly shifts the focus to her earlier life. Wood entered the entertainment industry at age 4,
4 years old.
and she starred in the incredibly dark, critically acclaimed, but highly mature film 13 when she was only 14 years old.
Wood says that starring in 13 essentially erased her childhood in the eyes of the industry. Or she says, once I was 14, it wasn't like they were waiting for me to turn 18. I was fair game at that point.
Fair game. Think about that phrasing.
It's disturbing. At 14 years old, she was directed to make out with a 23-year-old adult actor on screen. Her first on-screen sex scene was with Edward Norton when she was only 16. Now, she makes a point to note that Norton himself was entirely respectful, but she explicitly states that the adult environment itself was developmentally damaging.
It sent her terrible, warped messages.
Yes. Messages about what was acceptable for a child to endure for the sake of art.
The concept she uses in the interview is feeling like a sacrificial lamb. Child actors in this system are subjected to systemic, industry-wide grooming. Wood explains that as a child actor, you are professionally trained from day one to never say no.
Never say no to adults.
Right. You are taught that your primary job is to please the adults in the room, to completely ignore your own internal discomfort. And you are financially, socially, and professionally rewarded for having absolutely zero personal boundaries.
It makes me think of an unregulated company town from the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, that's an interesting comparison.
Right. Like, in a company town, you work for the mine, you buy your groceries from the company store, you live in company housing. The company owns your entire existence. But in Hollywood, the mine isn't extracting coal. The currency being extracted is youth, innocence, and vulnerability.
Exactly.
And the workers, these literal children, are expected to abandon all bodily autonomy to keep the town running and the profits flowing. Wood talks about being forced to do photo shoots she hated, wearing revealing dresses, getting into pools in wet clothes, when she was naturally a tomboy who just wanted to wear jeans and Converse.
And her boundaries were constantly overridden.
Right. By adults saying, I know you don't want to, but we'll all get in trouble at the studio if you don't do this.
That analogy is incredibly accurate. When a child's fundamental understanding of consent and bodily autonomy is continually, systemically overridden by authority figures in exchange for approval, love, or career advancement, it creates the perfect psychological blueprint for a predator later in life.
It lays the groundwork.
A predator like Manson doesn't want to do the hard work of breaking down strong boundaries. He looks for someone who has already been trained by their environment to suppress their own instincts and prioritize the demands of powerful adults. The Hollywood system didn't just fail to protect her as a child, it actively preconditioned her for extreme exploitation as an adult.
And the source material makes it clear this isn't just about her. It is a massive, broader industry crisis. The interviewer brings up the historically tragic outcomes for so many child stars.
The alarmingly high rates of suicides, the overdoses.
Yeah, the fact that so many former child actors are dead or severely struggling with addiction. They discuss the controversy surrounding the French film Cuties, where very young girls were put in highly sexualized, provocative situations, and major streaming platforms just aired anyway, despite massive public backlash.
Prioritizing content over child welfare.
Exactly. Wood even casually mentions a horrifying story about being 20 years old in a hotel room, and a man who worked for a very powerful Hollywood figure refused to leave her room, repeatedly offering her large sums of money for sex disguised as a massage.
Which the interviewer rightly points out is exactly the modus operandi of Jeffrey Epstein and his enablers.
Exactly. The entertainment industry operates on a deeply entrenched power dynamic where human beings, specifically children and young women, are treated as expendable products.
And when you are treated as a product for your entire formative development, encountering a highly manipulative rock star who treats you as an object to be possessed and controlled feels tragically familiar.
It doesn't register as a threat.
Right. It doesn't register as a life-threatening anomaly. It feels like the normal cost of doing business in the world.
Her internal logic becomes, I'm already a product for the studios, my image is already owned by the public, why wouldn't I be a product for this artist? It's a devastating realization.
It truly is.
So how do you even begin to rebuild a human life after surviving the Hollywood meat grinder, followed by a relationship that culminated in literal physical torture? That brings us to the grueling aftermath, the extreme paranoia she lived with, and ultimately her fight to change the system itself.
Surviving both of those environments requires an immense rebuilding of reality. The transition from victim to survivor is rarely clean or linear. It is fraught with intense psychological fallout, specifically complex PTSD.
And an ongoing, very real necessity for threat assessment. Wood describes her life immediately post-Manson, and it sounds like she was living in an active war zone. She was diagnosed with complex PTSD.
And just for clarity, because I think people use the term PTSD too broadly, how does complex PTSD differ from standard PTSD?
It's a crucial distinction. Standard PTSD typically stems from a single discrete traumatic event, like a horrific car crash or a singular violent assault. The brain is traumatized by that one moment.
Okay.
Complex PTSD, or CPTSD, is what happens when you are trapped inside the car crash every single day for years.
It results from prolonged, repeated trauma, where the victim has little or no chance of escape, like long-term child abuse, being a prisoner of war, or severe domestic coercive control. The brain literally rewires its baseline to assume the world is permanently dangerous. Your amygdala is stuck in the on position.
Which explains her living situation. She lived in a house in Los Angeles that she essentially retrofitted into a literal fortress. She installed a heavy steel vault door on her bedroom.
A vault door.
Yes. She built a dedicated safe room. She installed special security screens on the windows that you couldn't cut through. She even put bullet and riot-proof glass on the windows of her home.
And while that might sound like extreme paranoia to an outsider, it wasn't just a trauma response. It was a highly rational, necessary response to ongoing, documented intimidation tactics.
Right, because the terror didn't stop when she left. The intimidation she details in the interview is so insidious because it's designed to be entirely untraceable. She had to hire full-time security, and she notes they frequently had to execute evasive driving maneuvers to lose cars that were tailing her, especially when she went out to perform publicly. She received constant, harassing phone calls, just roll calls from random numbers hanging up.
And then there were the cyber attacks, which are terrifying.
Yes. The director of her documentary, Amy Berg, had her private Amazon account hacked, and the hacker purchased movies with explicitly threatening titles, sending receipts for films called Burn the Witch or I'm Going to Kill You.
Another woman involved had someone hack into her home's Bluetooth system just to blast heavy metal music at random hours of the night.
This is a masterclass in psychological warfare by proxy. The abuser doesn't actually have to break down the door to maintain their control over the victim's life.
No, they just have to send a subtle, deniable signal that says, I can reach you anywhere, at any time, in your most private spaces, and you will never be able to legally prove it's me.
It keeps the victim's nervous system trapped in that state of hypervigilance. You lock the doors 4 times, you look under the beds, every little technological glitch sets off a panic attack.
It is the exact continuation of coercive control, just executed without physical proximity.
And when Wood finally decided she had enough, when she decided to fight back using the legal system, she hit a massive structural brick wall.
The legal wall, yes.
She went to the district attorney's office. She brought a mountain of evidence of severe domestic violence, and the DA looked at her and said, essentially, we know he abused you. We believe you entirely. We are so sorry, but there is absolutely nothing we can do to prosecute him.
Because the statute of limitations had expired.
Right.
This highlights a profound institutional failure in how our justice system handles trauma. Statutes of limitations exist, theoretically, to prevent ancient claims where evidence has degraded.
Sure.
But the legal system is inherently designed around rigid, specific timelines that often completely contradict the psychological reality of trauma. It takes years for victims of severe coercive control to deprogram.
To unravel the gaslighting.
Exactly. To realize that what happened to them was actually a crime, and to finally feel physically safe enough to come forward. By the time their brain allows them to process the trauma, the arbitrary legal clock has already run out.
Wood says they just sat there in the DA's office in the saddest, most defeated silence.
It's heartbreaking.
And as for the rape charge stemming from the music video shoot, she details how witness tampering occurred. Specifically, another survivor being pressured into recanting their testimony, which created just enough reasonable doubt that the DA didn't feel confident they could secure a conviction in court.
The interviewer points out that this perfectly mirrors the Epstein case.
Yeah, where the legal system proves time and time again that it is built by and designed for the people holding the power.
It creates a devastating secondary trauma. The justice system, the very institution society tells you to rely on for protection, acknowledges your abuse, validates your pain, but functionally shrugs its shoulders. It reinforces the abuser's core message. that they are untouchable, and that the victim is ultimately powerless.
But this is exactly where Evan Rachel Wood's resilience transitions from inspiring to genuinely awe-inspiring. Because the legal system looked at her and said no. And she didn't just give up. She decided to change the legal system itself.
She did.
She helped draft, lobby for, and pass the Phoenix Act in the state of California. She successfully expanded the statute of limitations for domestic violence felonies, taking it from a mere 1 to 3 years all the way up to 7 years.
That is monumental civil victory.
It really is.
It means that future victims in California will actually have the time they psychologically need to process their trauma, escape their abusers, and seek justice without a ticking clock silencing them. She took her deepest, most agonizing pain and weaponized it to legislate protection for thousands of others.
And she didn't stop there. When Manson predictably sued her for defamation and fraud, which is a classic, well-documented abuser tactic designed to drain a victim's finances and silence them through legal intimidation, she refused to back down.
Many of his claims were immediately kicked out of court by the judge.
Yeah. And Wood notes she was actually happy, even eager to go to court because she had all the evidence lined up to prove she hadn't lied about anything.
And that is the one thing abusers hate more than anything.
Yeah.
The legal discovery process.
Absolutely.
They rely heavily on the threat of a ruinous lawsuit to force a settlement and an NDA. They absolutely do not want the execution of a public trial where their actions, their emails, and their behavior are scrutinized under oath.
Exactly. So when his legal team realized she wasn't folding under the pressure, they tried to offer her a settlement payout to just make the whole thing go away. He said, "I'll pay you to settle this."
And she flatly refused.
She refused. She told them, "I don't want your money. I just want my legal fees paid back because you dragged me here and I didn't do anything wrong." So he agrees to pay her legal fees, but then, in a final attempt at control, he tries to attach a strict non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, demanding she never speak about the abuse or the case again.
And she looked at him and said, "No."
"You're not taking one more thing from me. You will never have my voice." She called his bluff entirely. And rather than face her evidence in open court without the protection of an NDA, he dropped his own lawsuit.
It's the ultimate, undeniable dismantling of his power. By refusing the payout and refusing the silence, she exposed the lawsuit for exactly what it was: a baseless paper tiger intimidation tactic.
She didn't just survive his coercive control, she actively defeated it on a public stage using the very system he tried to use against her.
Which perfectly synthesizes the takeaways from this incredibly intense deep dive.
It does. We've traced the entire anatomy of abuse here today. We look at the initial grooming and the weaponization of empathy through the implementation of the mask, the biology of extreme coercive control, the complicity of the Hollywood machine in creating vulnerable targets, all the way to her fight for systemic legislative change.
And the core message that both Wood and the interviewer keep returning to in the source material is that narcissism and coercive control are highly predictable.
They explicitly refer to the documentary Narcissist Playbook.
And it's a perfectly apt title. Once you learn the specific tactics, the love bombing, the isolation, playing the wounded victim, the sleep deprivation, the gradual boundary erosion, you can't unsee them. They operate on a mechanical loop.
Wood says it became like a game of chess. Once she finally saw the entire board, she knew exactly what his next move would be, and that predictive knowledge is how she ultimately escaped.
And we really want you listening right now to understand that these tactics do not just happen in gothic Hollywood mansions with millionaire rock stars. The playbook is universal.
It happens in everyday relationships. It happens in toxic corporate workplaces. The expert and the host in the source material even discuss how these exact manipulation tactics happen on a mass societal scale through branding and marketing.
The interviewer, Andrew Gold, makes a slightly humorous but incredibly apt analogy. He talks about buying what he thought was a healthy, authentic, organic Brazilian acai bowl, only to realize he had been completely manipulated by the branding and the aesthetic into buying what was essentially just a bowl of ice cream and Nutella.
Right. It seems like a leap from domestic violence to breakfast food, but the underlying psychological mechanism of manipulation is exactly the same, presenting a carefully crafted illusion that appeals directly to your desires, your empathy, or your values, while intentionally hiding the toxic, unhealthy reality underneath.
Whether it's a corporate brand selling you a lifestyle, a politician selling you an ideology, or an abuser selling you a soulmate connection, the defense against it remains the same. Critical thinking, recognizing the mask for what it is, and maintaining rigid, uncompromising personal boundaries.
This has been a heavy journey today, but an incredibly necessary one. We started this deep dive talking about how diagnosing psychological abuse is like trying to read a murky, broken X-ray. But Evan Rachel Wood has handed us a very clear, highly detailed map of the damage and the mechanisms that cause it.
A vital map.
And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. We just spent this entire deep dive exploring how a literal cult of personality, complete with isolation, physiological torture, and brainwashing, can exist between just two people in a single living room.
Yeah.
But think about the wider world around you. Think about the media you consume, the workplaces you inhabit, and the power dynamics you simply accept as normal. If a 19-year-old girl can be assaulted on a bed in a room full of working adult professionals, and those professionals choose to just walk away because they don't want to make waves with the boss, where in your own life are you acting as the silent crew member?
Where are you watching someone's boundaries get crossed, watching the mask slip in real time, and assuming someone else will be the one to step in and call cut?
Exactly. A powerful, vital question. The playbook of abuse only works when the rest of us agree to look away. Keep your eyes open, trust your instincts, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.